Welcome to One of Nine. I'm Maria Jones, and I got a great little chat in with our friend Kerri. Kerri's married to Ryan. They're well linked up in circles and
They're the people behind the headlines.
helping everyone out and doing other things and linking people up. And
Mossad for Catholics.
we've met them before, but exciting to sit down for a chat and have a nice meal.
Before you have that chat, I just want to do a quick intro. Hello, dear listener, and welcome to a new feature on One of Nine, the canoe. Going backwards. I'm going to invite a variety of guys, practicing Catholics, single and married, and quiz them on their worldview. Hear the silence. Whoa, no, don't do that. This ethereal, mystical setting, appropriate for what we want to do, which is discuss. Ooh. Oh wow, gorgeous. Right, let's try and get up there. Turn around. Good boys.
Ryan, Kerri, and then you got married. I think that's so romantic. I think that's something that society is really missing out on as well. That exciting, romantic, just getting married and just taking everything on.
Do you know what? I think when you spend so many years being single and stressed out about it because you don't want to be single, you want to be married, and then you're finally married, the other stuff, it's not perfect, but it does fall away, doesn't it? The other stresses, because it's like, well, now we're in this together and we can do this together. And that's so much nicer than doing things alone. And if you've been doing it alone for a long time, I think the relief is just so palpable. And it's just such a delight to have someone to do life with.
Yeah, and on top of that, because you're married, you don't then have this is a test period.
Yes.
Stress,
Yes.
which must be like, even if people don't say it's stressful, like you are ultimately being tested
Well, and you're
to
also
see whether you're worthy or not.
and you're
to live
you're
with
in
forever.
a constant state of discernment about this person. Is this person the person I'm going to marry? What are we going to do? Is this going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And there's a level of uncertainty that is appropriate, but that's stressful as well, and that goes away when you get married as well, which is really nice.
Tell me a bit about your studies and things and where you've come from.
So my background is in theology. I did several academic degrees. I went to Rome to study for a bit, and then I was teaching in America before I moved here, before I married Ryan. I've done a bit of teaching here in various places of theology, but I found that academia was not my first love. I do love helping people understand God better and understand the faith better. But what I really loved about teaching was working one-on-one with students. And that is kind of how I transitioned into the work I do now, which is one-on-one with people, helping them discern their lives and figure out their priorities, make positive changes. That was a lot of what I was doing kind of behind the scenes with my students, but I also had to mark their essays, which was not my favorite thing to do. I had students come chat with me, and they would, we'd have to talk about their essay, but then they'd also I would ask them about what they're majoring in or, what they were planning to do after graduation. And those chats were great, but I also found that a lot of them didn't have plans or were having trouble figuring out how to make plans and hadn't been really equipped to discern well their next step, how to listen to God, how to pray about it, how to practically try things out. I remember one student coming and I said, "Oh, what are you studying for your major?" And she said, "I'm studying accounting." And I thought, "Oh, great. You really like math. You like dealing with money. You like Excel spreadsheets." And she said, "No." And I was like, "Okay, well, why would you do accounting?" And she said, "Well, my parents thought it was a good idea and I would make money." And I just thought, I think that's a recipe for unhappiness. I mean, not necessarily, but I'm not sure that's the best way forward for you. So I ended up kind of transitioning out of academia. I still do teaching and bits and bobs here and there, but I really love the one-on-one work.
When I hear discerning, this is like almost embarrassing to say maybe now after our pre-filming chat. What I was just thinking was, are you getting married, or are you being a priest, or are you being a nun? And that's it. Kind of yes or no. Mm-hmm. But then you've really opened my eyes to this discerning and breaking it down. And so why did you think there was a need for this sort of counselling on discernment?
Gosh, so I think you're right. I think a lot of people just immediately go to... They go straight to what permanent state in life do you think God is asking you to be in? And that's sort of like the only discernment question. What people don't understand is that they have a vocation given to them at baptism, and that is to evangelize, right? To spread the good news, to be Christ's body in the world. And that comes from your baptism, and it's further specified in a state in life if you end up in a permanent state in life of vows. But that's not the only space for it, right? Like you're married now, and it isn't like your evangelization ended, right? Actually, in some ways, it opened up even more because it's further specified through your marriage, your children, the ministries you feel called to do together, the service work. So I would often give vocation talks where I would talk about baptismal vocation, and I had a lot of students say to me, well, we've never heard that before, and I think I was a young person who was caught up in this question, just like so many young people are, going to these youth retreats, and then there's a talk on like, are you going to be a nun?
Yeah.
Are you going to be married? And you think, oh God, do you want me to be a nun? I don't really want to be a nun, so maybe I should be because I don't want to be, and you're kind of in this turmoil. And I think there's just not enough encouragement to people to just pause and sort of get to know the Lord and get to know themselves, and to realize that this is a lifelong dialogue. It's not just one big question. It's everyday questions.
And when you get married, so I just thought I've discerned, and as in, when we spoke, I did that discernment thing, and I got married, and that's it, I'm done.
Yep.
But then after our talk, you even opened up things to me that just broke down all the little things in daily life. So back to discerning the big questions, because they are like the first ones, and how people kind of navigate through that part before we go into like then all the other daily ones. What common pitfalls do you see for young people when they are discerning? Like you were saying, like practically.
So in terms of discerning the big question, it's funny, I think it is actually tied to a habit with the smaller questions. So I don't think, I hope for most of us that our first discernment is not the biggest question. I hope that we've had practice discerning the smaller questions kind of whenever that bigger question might pop up for us. So what I find is that people seem to really struggle with a very static idea of providence, divine providence. And what I mean by that is, I think a lot of people get really stuck that like God has one path for me, and if I don't find that path, the rest of my life is a total mistake, right? And there's no sense of divine providence is something that God is inviting me to interact with. Like God wants a relationship with me. It's an interactive relationship. I'm not a robot. He's not just going to program me like you have to do X.
Like the conveyor belt, and it's like,
yeah. And I think when people can be free of that really static notion, there's a real delight in discovering God's invitation and the response on our part as well. It just becomes a very interactive dialogue and a life dialogue with the Lord about what I'm called to do, what I'm going to try. What do you think, Lord? I think there are times when he has very specific plans for us, and there are plenty of times when he doesn't. If you look at the scriptures, you see Jesus doing both for people, go home, take her home, give her lunch, it's quite a specific instruction, but other times it's just, well, don't tell anyone what I did. And other than that, it's kind of like, do whatever you want, within obviously a moral compass, rightly oriented. So I think the number one thing I see is people getting really trapped in thinking, I'm going to make a huge mistake and God can't deal with that.
And then do you think then that might lead to something that Peter and I have definitely kind of noticed around, of like over-discerning?
Yeah,
Is that a thing?
I think I was mentioning this to you. A priest asked me about what they call the Order of Perpetual Discerners, which I thought was such a good title. Those individuals who kind of like dance around discerning religious life and never enter, but never kind of walk away and date someone and get married. And I think, again, that static notion does kind of lead to this static panic of like, well, I might need to do this, but I don't know. And because I don't know, I can't make a move of any kind whatsoever. And so I'm just going to keep thinking about it, and I'm going to overthink it because I'm panicked about making a mistake. And I think the way out of that is action. right? The way out of
Okay.
that is action. So whether that's I'm going to spend a weekend at this retreat house with these priests because I feel like I might be called to them, or I'm going to ask this nice lady out on a date because I can't go from 0 to marriage, right? There's sort of like baby steps along the way. I think that's really key. And to be praying as we do that, because you'll hear from the Lord as you're in action. You know, you'll get a sense of like, yeah, keep going this way, or don't go that way, or I'm praying about this, I'm really trying. That's different than sort of like I'm sitting in my room stewing and ruminating over and over and over, and I just can't come to a decision.
Like you say about the timeline where there's only one path, and if I stray from the path, it's all to ruin. Do you take a view on a person could marry not many people, but there is a selection of many people, and if you choose one, tough call.
I think it's possible for some people that there is a one, but I think the danger in thinking that there may be a one is that you end up in a kind of fatalism where I'm fated or destined to marry this one person, and if I don't, then everything else is a disaster or a mistake. And it leaves aside the free will that God has given us. So you can't be forced into marrying someone, right? That's one of the sort of key tenets of Catholic marriage, is it has to be free. You have to enter into it freely. And I think for some people, the notion of the one might interfere with that freedom to freely choose someone, because they feel that they're fated to only marry this particular person. I don't know whether or not it exists, but whether or not it exists, I think the idea is generally unhelpful for discernment.
If a date's not worked out the way you wanted, just keep moving. Next one, action.
Yeah, as much as you can.
Yeah.
I think so.
And then for priesthood and religious life, like you were saying, go and visit somewhere. Just go and start making action in small ways.
Yeah, I mean, get to know the community, because the thing I think we forget sometimes is that discernment is always a two-way street. You know, you're going to marry someone else. You're not just discerning and they're just a box. Like, they're a person. You know, they're not a tick box. So they're discerning as well. And the same is true of priesthood in a diocese and religious life for women and men. You're discerning a community, a life with a community, and they're discerning whether or not it's right or fitting for you.
Welcome you.
Yeah. So it's a both and it's quite difficult to do that if you're just sitting alone in your room all the time, stewing over it.
What about, you've made that decision, and then this was something I thought was interesting that you said about, it's almost a way to make your life choices for quality of life, of like maybe avoiding stresses, and of then continuing this idea of discerning. It might sound obvious to lots of people that are listening, but I just never thought I needed to be discerning lots of other things now, or, you know, some people discern coming on the channel, and I think that's a big question. You know, that might be a big question, but otherwise, where do you think this fits into people's lives, like the discerning?
Gosh, I think it fits in just about everywhere. But in your example, there was a decision about your children's schooling to make, right? And I think that was a real, probably, process of discernment. Whether or not you thought about it as one, you probably prayed a lot and spoke to people, and you two probably had a lot of conversations about it, thinking, what's best for our children? You know, what has the Lord put on our path? What could we do? I think that was probably a process of discernment for you. And I think for most parents, especially as your kids get older, there's more and more discernment, right? Do we give them a phone? Do we not give them a phone? Do I let them go to this party? You know, what kind of family culture do we want to have? Do we want to set rules? Do we want to set traditions? Do we want to establish things? All of these things are wonderful things to discern, and that isn't to make them, you know, bigger and heavier, but to actually give a sense of freedom that the Lord is with us even in these decisions. You know, we're not just sort of left out on our own. Good luck, guys. You know, He's with us, and He wants to have a dialogue about that.
Yeah, and I love what you were saying about family culture, and that, you know, getting into marriage and can just be like this fast thing that, you know, well, it was quite fast for us. You get married, and then you're jumping in, like maybe a baby comes along, maybe a few, and then suddenly you're just like trying to make dinner and be healthy this week and try and do it next week and the week after as well. Or maybe what you suggested to me was that your family culture is something that you can control and something you can think about, and just like stepping back from like the everyday and thinking, what can we do in our family culture? How do we want it to look?
So I think one of the things is to try to move from being reactive to being proactive, and that means probably you're going to have to hit the pause button at some point for at least a certain amount of time, whether that's 10 minutes in the evening or a weekend or a week where there's no school. But I think it really takes some investment on the part of the parents who are setting the cultural tone to think very clearly about what they want for their family and how they want to implement that. And that can be simple. It doesn't have to be sort of like this big endeavor, but to say, okay, as a family, we really value kindness. We have seen that that is not something, our children seem to be really agreeing with. And so how are we gonna foster kindness? How are we gonna foster a culture of kindness? Well, we might memorize a Bible verse about kindness together. We might come up with a couple responses when the children are not being kind. We might actually make some apologies to each other in front of the kids if we haven't been kind and we're not setting that example. So I think it can be really simple. It doesn't have to be this kind of big, overwhelming thing, oh my gosh, family culture, but to think really clearly about what you want to hand on to your children and what kind of home you want to create for them. And that includes like what kind of art you have on the walls. What do you want them seeing every day? What do you want to write on the bathroom mirror, in the morning for them to see when they wake up? Just little things like that, I think, are really small but really doable.
Mine's already thinking. And what about in your marriage as well? Like any ideas of how to make loveliness or, whatever your ideas are for in marriage?
We were privileged to sit through family prayers with someone about a year ago, and I thought it was really lovely that they and their family had established as part of their evening family prayer routine a space for apology. So in the evening, they kind of had a set of prayers that they went through, and then there was this pause, and it was sort of, does anyone have anything they want to say sorry for? And I thought it was so beautiful because the parent leading it, he apologized to his daughter for losing his temper, and then I think the daughter apologized to her brother for something. But there was just this real sense of this is normal. It's normal to apologize. It's normal to take responsibility for your actions, and it's normal to offer forgiveness. And I think that alone creates a beautiful culture, and hopefully children who grow up and who are ready to apologize when they make a mistake and offer forgiveness to others when they do. So that's just one example.
And at the very least, they can do it at that level,
Yeah.
Oh, how lovely.
So yeah, I mean, there are lots of families doing lots of wonderful things, and I think that is actually a danger sometimes, maybe watching shows like this where you just think, oh, I'm not like her, and look at what their family's doing, and I couldn't possibly do that. It's so overwhelming. But that's the whole thing about discernment, is asking the Lord what he's given you. Like he's entrusted your kids to you, and he's given you your husband and your marriage, and you're going to have different struggles and different gifts than that family over there. And so discernment can really help, I think, overcome that sense of comparison and overwhelm, like, oh, they have a great marriage and we don't, and this and that. Well, they're different personalities, and you're not seeing it all. So I think, just really being willing to get to know yourself, get to know your spouse, get to know your kids. Like, have you heard of the 5 love languages?
Yes.
So we love those. The concept, quite briefly, is just that there's sort of 5 main ways that people demonstrate and receive love. And he wrote a book about it for kids as well. So I think that's another thing parents can do, is think about what my child's love language be, and how can I ensure that I'm showing it to them in that way.
I agree that it's a real generosity of the channel. People open up their homes and we see it, but it is easy to compare and say, yeah, we're not doing that. But there's so many roles to be fulfilled in society. Teachers, you need to be quite a rounded person. But then there's other, we need soldiers, and we need maybe what you might call more austere personalities. And no bad thing if your family is a bit more austere, because it'll produce the children that need to go into those roles.
Like there needs to be variety.
Yeah, there needs to be a variety. So I just think,
it's good that
pat yourself on the back if you're not like the families you see on One of Nine, and do come onto the channel to show that you're part of that spectrum.
I think
tapestry.
It's a great word, isn't it? It's a tapestry, because you've got all these different colors and threads and weights woven together. And I think one of the challenges is really not to confuse holiness and godliness with personality. So I think sometimes we look at people and we think, oh, I need to be like them, but we accidentally think, oh, I need to be like their personality is, when in fact what we need to imitate is their virtue in the particular way that we're called to imitate it. So if you look at the communion of saints, there's so many different personalities, right? But holiness, love of God, is primary. And so I think that is the discernment question, like, what does love of God look like for us? What does virtue look like for our family? What things do we need to focus on? What gifts do we have? And not, oh, do we look like the Joneses, so to speak?
Yeah, lol, I hope no one does think that.
We were touching on our little chat before that you were breaking down into two categories. Is it a moral question or is it a moral question? So it's not a moral question. Well done, Lani.
Well done, Lani. Points for Lani. Treat on her way.
Yay.
My arm's gone dead.
Oh,
thank you.
Lani, thanks, darling.
And Kerri, just occasionally, if you can make eye contact with the director just to see if he's happy, and then translate that eye contact to Maria, either the pleasure or displeasure of the director.
I thought that was an interesting question because maybe at some point some things do. So for like, what are we having for dinner? Like, and sometimes I think, oh, I hope my mum doesn't see what I'm going to make the children for dinner tonight because it's just potatoes. And she would just think, there's not enough colours, there's not enough vegetables. And, she's just so good at, doing all those things all the time. Or it's just like everything's from a tin or everything's from the freezer or whatever. But actually, that's not necessarily a moral question. And maybe at some point it would get to being a moral question if I'm... so will you tell us a bit more about that?
In my work with clients, a lot of what I see, and I see this in myself too, in most women, we have false guilt a lot of the time. Now, guilt is a gift. It means our consciences are working correctly if we feel guilty because we've sinned. So if you're raising children and one of them hits the other in the face, you would hope that the hitter feels guilty, right? Because that means their conscience is working and they know that that was wrong.
Yeah.
But what's happened in our culture is I think we've made certain things moral that are not moral. Like, do you serve only, organic, grass-fed, raised, whatever? That's not a moral question, right? How you school your children, that's quite a prudential individual question. Now, obviously, you don't want to sort of send them to the wolves, but, what school you choose is going to be an individual choice, not necessarily a moral choice. And I think we were talking about even things like Christmas, like every mother has guilt about whether or not they've made the perfect magical Christmas for their children. Have they done all the traditions? Have they made sure that it was special enough and they picked out the right gifts? And none of these are moral questions. None of them. To have guilt over that is something that we have to work on letting go of, which is difficult. But I would hope freeing in the sense of, guilt is when we've sinned. We stand before God, we know we've done wrong, we have to confess our sins. That's what guilt is for. It is not for whether or not you have matching throw pillows on your perfectly placed sofa underneath the twinkle lights of the Christmas tree.
So then how can we get out of the guilt thing? How can we get out of the...
I think some of
at
it...
Christmas this year.
But I think some of it is discernment. This is the whole point, is like discerning, okay, what has the Lord given our family? Kind of where are our energy levels at? How many children do we have that we're caring for? What are we called to do sort of in this space such that virtue is still our most important thing? So is getting the Christmas tree and the presents making everybody more stressed out? Is it making them unkind? Is it making them selfish, right? How are we doing things such that we are ordering our family life in the way that we want to order it? And I think discernment frees you from the need to have a perfect rainbow of vegetables on your plate every night, because that just might not be the thing right now. You might have kids who need you for other reasons, or, new babies, or sleepless nights, or illness in the home. And I think discernment helps us be gentle with ourselves because we know what the Lord is calling us to be faithful to, and the rest can just fall away.
So knowing yourself, can you tell us a bit more about that? Because love language is one way.
Yep.
Some men are all going to be melting into the, just hearing it. Peter's probably doing that now. He's just like, love the love languages. I don't know what it is about them. Maybe it sounds too warm and fuzzy for him. He's
Sounds
just
a bit
like
cheesy, doesn't it? My love tank is empty. Yeah, it's a bit cheesy, but works.
However, it's got something about it. But any other ideas of knowing oneself?
Yeah, so I am a big fan of journaling. I think it's one of the best ways to know yourself because it kind of gives you a record of yourself over time. And also when you write, especially when you're not writing for an audience of any kind, you can just be really brutally honest and just sort of dump things out on the page, so to speak. And what happens sometimes is that honesty comes out on the page, and it's not always stuff that you're conscious of or that you might say to someone else. You might just sort of express it all. And then a week later, you might come back and read that and think, oh gosh, I was really unhappy in that situation, but I told everyone it was fine. I guess it wasn't fine, because it was a safe space, so to speak, to unload that. And so I'm a big fan of journaling. I think it's a place to get to know yourself and to get to know God too, because he's there with you writing on the pages. He is the Word. So he's with us on the page. And I think also I'm a big fan of list making because it's so pressure free. You don't have to write in complete sentences or paragraphs or anything like that. And sometimes when I'm stressed, I'll just make a list of all the things that are stressing me out. And I feel better for just having written it down, but it's also really revelatory. So if I'm stressed about money, I might say, oh my gosh, I remember a few years ago, I was like, I'm so stressed that I have student loans. That's really stressing me out. And then I wrote down a bunch of other things, but I realized the daily thing that stressed me out was that I didn't have a sieve for my rice in the kitchen to rinse it out, because I was eating rice every day. And every day I was just really annoyed. And I thought, that's 5 pounds. I can deal with that problem. I can actually fix it. But if I hadn't made that list, I would have just thought, oh, it's the big student loan thing that's really weighing on me. It wasn't. It was the daily thing, and I could fix it. So I'm a big fan of journaling. I'm a big fan of lists. It's why I've made the list journal. I guess we
Very
can
cool.
Show that to the camera now.
The list journal. 50 lists to help you know yourself better. And actually this is interesting because I was about to ask, where do you write things down? Because I do have it in my mind. Sometimes I feel like I need to do a brain dump. But in all honesty, in this last 12 months, I might have done that 5 times. Because I need to go and get a piece of paper from somewhere. I need to get a pen from somewhere. But actually, if it's maybe more on the top of, or just this little book slotted in that cupboard that hasn't got a door on it, then it's ready to go.
Yeah, I think it depends on the type of person you are. I think some people get paralyzed by needing the perfect journal, and it's always in this journal at this time, and I always use this pen, and they don't have it, so they're like, well, I can't do it. And I would encourage you just to write on the back of a grocery receipt, just be free of that need for the perfect thing every time. But for some people, having the thing is the motivator to do it, in which case that serves you. And I would encourage you to download this, to print it out, have it in your home.
We'll put a link on the thing.
Because, again, for some people, I think thinking about their day, for people who are thinkers, that just comes really easily. And for some people who tend to be quite action-oriented, they often don't pause to think about things because they're doing things, and that's fine.
So is there a spectrum, thinkers and doers?
I think
and you find
so.
yourself somewhere on it?
I think so, and I think it might change for you over the course of your life and maybe how tired you are, at least for me. That's a big thing, right? But I think some of us tend more towards action, and some of us tend more towards thought. And again, if you know yourself, then you can know kind of where you are along that spectrum.
And then in different parts of life as well, for some things you could just not be confident and just be think, oh, I'm just not going to do anything. And other things you might be like, right, I know myself, I know what we need to do.
Yep. And that can change over time too. You at 20 might be different than you at 30, and that's fine.
So do you think, I'm wondering, is it a good idea to journal then as and when you feel like it, and regularly, or one or the other, or what do you
Again,
think?
I think it depends on the type of person you are, but I think both are really useful. I think for some people, the structure is freeing to do it at the same time every day. It holds them accountable, and for some people, it's paralyzing. And so if they skip a day, then it's like, oh my gosh, I said I was going to do it every day, and I skipped a day, so now I can't do it at all.
Yeah.
Right? So I think we have to, again, know ourselves and move in the direction of journaling serves you. You don't serve journaling, right? You are not a slave to it. It is a thing to serve you in your life. So do it in the way that serves you and don't make yourself a slave to it.
Yeah. And so you, in this book, have created 50 kind of titles to get yourself thinking. Mm-hmm. Is there any you'd like to point out to us?
Ooh, so one of my favorite ones is things that people said I would love, and I did, and I didn't love it. And actually, that's one of my favorite lists, because if you are a person who struggles to say no, if you are a person who finds yourself easily swayed by others or feels peer pressure a lot and kind of gives into that, you may actually have done a lot of things that people said, oh, you're gonna love it. It's gonna be great. You're gonna have a great time. And you may have actually hated it. But because you felt like you should like it, in your mind, it's still in the, well, I should like it category. And so maybe you haven't made that step into the freedom of, oh no, I actually didn't like it. So I'll give you an example. I am not a loud crowds and lots of people and noise kind of person, but for so long I felt that I should go to the New Year's Eve party, or I should go to this big event, I should go to this concert. Everybody says it's going to be such a good time and you're going to have so much fun, but I didn't. I had a headache, like it was not fun for me at all. And I have this list, and it's so helpful because now I can look back on it when I'm feeling a little bit peer pressured to do something and say, okay, is that something that in the future I would probably write on that list?
I like this, because actually then, like, as you go through, so you don't need to just have that one list for the one day, you can go back to it. You're just being aware of these things. And even if you hadn't written on them, you just like know these things, things I would like to do weekly, or the culture, that I want to do the culture and the family thing. Peter, we'll have to have a meeting.
Yeah, and actually I have like worksheets that I do with my clients who want to improve their family culture. And
Things that you do with your clients. Say again.
Yeah.
Peter, oh, maybe you didn't cough in the microphone.
I have things I do with my clients who want to invest in their family culture. I've got worksheets and things like that for parents too. Aww.
It's Mama.
Hi.
But I think you journaled your way out of academia. And there's no, I think, your situation in academia, you'd given, over 10 years of study, loads of student loans, from being a young girl, you were going to be a theologian. Some pretty heavy-hitting theologians in the US were put a lot of pressure on you to be the next whoever else it's going to be. You're clearly good at it. And there was an element of peer pressure, I think, too. Massive expectation, massive sunk costs. And I think journaling, reading back over your journals for your first year or two as an academic helped you give permission to yourself to say, gosh, I was unhappy. I was unhappy. I was unhappy. I was unhappy. Well, there's a consistent pattern here. Maybe I can be free enough to not should want to be an academic after all this. I'm actually want to do something else. And there'd be a lot of peer pressure not to be you're on tenure track as well. It's not like you were just... So I think you journaled your way out of academia into this role.
It's a really powerful thing.
Well, I think it was part of just sort of reflecting on my days, in journaling, again, not feeling pressured, but again, it's like, well, I had students come to my office today, or, I was advising the student club and we had a great time and we had a great chat, but I've still got 50 essays to mark, And so I think it was helpful for me in learning which parts were a good fit and which parts were not, so that in the future I try to do the ones that are a good fit, and I've tried to step away from the ones that are not. And I think you're right. I think journaling was a big part of that for me, because it's one thing for someone else to reflect back to you, which is really helpful, but sometimes you don't believe them because you think you know yourself better. But when it's yourself confronting yourself, right, on the page, it's pretty compelling, right? Like, I wrote that I was unhappy. It's not just that so-and-so said I was. I actually have to face my own words.
And then you can see, like Ryan was saying, you can see the trends. And even if it is that every time it's dinner time, you're stressing out about what you need to do. And then it's like, well, I've heard some moms recently, they write a 3-week meal plan. Maybe that's something I could just spend an hour to sit down, or 2 hours, or however many hours it would take me, who is very undecisive, to do. And then back onto your thought as well about... I wonder whether, like you were saying earlier about being somebody that is prone to saying yes a lot, to saying no a lot, and you would start noticing that through journaling. And then what are your thoughts on that? How do you notice that people deal with like coming, like you kind of know you keep saying yes to things. How do you kind of get out of it? Or you keep saying no and you're just too nervous to commit to anything?
Again, I think there's that spectrum of some of us tend to say yes a lot and some of us tend to say no a lot. So figuring out where you are on that spectrum, I think, is quite helpful.
So again, about like knowing yourself, I suppose, just knowing that.
Knowing yourself. And I think paying attention. So I remember reaching a point where I said yes to something and then I would immediately feel tired. And like, the body doesn't lie. It doesn't lie to us. Our brains are quite good at rationalizing. Our minds are quite good at rationalizing, rather. But like, the body doesn't lie. And I would say yes, and I would just think, oh my gosh, I need a nap. I just need a nap. And that to me was a very clear sign that probably was not a great yes to say. Again, particularly because it wasn't a moral situation of any kind. It was just, would you do this thing or not?
Yeah.
So I think I think the other thing is that I found helpful in learning to say no is actually the same thing with the meal plan that you just mentioned, is trying to establish some criteria so that you don't have to make a decision in a stressful time. So what do we have for dinner tonight when it's 5 o'clock and we're all exhausted and everybody's melting down? That's a terrible time to have to make a decision of any kind whatsoever. So if the decision has already been made, it's actually a lot easier because I don't have to use that decision-making energy. It's just done. We're having pizza tonight. It's been on the calendar. It's fine. And I think the same is true with saying no. If I've established criteria, like, okay, I'm not going to say, I don't take meetings before noon on Mondays. I just don't, because I need that time to kind of revive myself from the weekend and get into the week. And I prefer to do creative work in the morning. So it's like, okay, I just don't do things before, outside things before noon on Monday. So it's a really easy no if someone asks me to meet before noon on a Monday. But I think the decision's made.
Yeah, like you're saying, this is just so much more efficient than have to keep learning it the hard way, because for so long, actually, I kept getting to 5 o'clock and be like, what have we got for dinner? Not every single night, but a lot of nights, and it's really stressful, and there's loads of children, they're hungry, and then it's just like, So what I did was I set an alarm on my phone, eventually, that's like 2 o'clock, and it's like, make dinner prep. In fact, it started at 4 o'clock, and there was not nearly early enough. 4 o'clock, and it says, thank you, God, for dinner preparation, because I even used to dread it so much that I thought, well, look, like with all the challenges that I don't really like, then God wants us to get to heaven, just take on the challenge and thank God for him, thank God for it, if it's humbling, if it's just going to help me grow more in that area or whatever it is. And then I just moved it backwards even more when that was not a good time. But then journaling, I thought like journaling was like maybe Bible journaling, like people do Bible journaling. I see, because Americans are so inspiring with all the different things that they do, they definitely like do a lot of journaling. So I thought, they just kind of do that thing over there. And I didn't realise it was going to be something for me, but this is really going to help me. Not only having the titles and the things just to be aware of, to know yourself, to know when these stressful situations come out, and to know how you can get out of it, but also that I can just let off anywhere, on a piece of paper, on a receipt, on the corner of something, even just like putting it there.
I've got a free workshop on my website as well to help people learn to journal for discernment, and just some regular questions that you can ask in prayer, because journaling can take all sorts of forms. But like you said, Bible journaling or prayer journaling is one of them as well, where you're kind of dialoguing with the Lord as you journal, and as you think about these things, and as you pray through these things, and as you read the scriptures about them. So that can also be quite helpful, I think, for people.
And do you think journaling is part of the love languages? Because you're writing something. Is it like a...
That's a really good question. Maybe those of us who have words of affirmation prefer journaling. I don't know. I mean, some people... So when I say journaling, I'm usually talking about words, but I know some people who really need to draw. And if they look back on their art over time, you will see a trend of, happiness and darkness and challenges. Or I have a friend who I lived with for a while, and we shared a flat. And I would sometimes come home and she would just be playing the piano like crazy, just playing out all of her feelings on the piano. And I thought, if she just kept a record of like what she wanted to play on what days, I bet that would say an awful lot about where she was in life. So for some of us, words are going to be the main thing, but I think for other people, things like art or music might be part of it. As long as you can keep a record, I think that's the helpful thing.
So like a journal of your emotions, your expressions, because you might express your language through, like you say, music, through just getting stressed out with the children, and then reading that back, and then working out how you can sort it out.
Yeah. And asking the Lord to help and give grace in those moments, because when you're in them, it's hard. It's really hard. But I think, again, when you can take that pause and step back a little bit, there's a freedom to just think about it in a slightly more objective way than you can in the moment when emotions are quite heated and everybody's hungry and has low blood sugar and is really stressed out.
For my husband, who might still not be sold on the idea of journaling, is it an idea that I might even journal for someone else, like notice things that I could, in marriage think, I can see that this is a time of, I don't know, stress or something else going on? Is it always negative things that you look for as well, or is it positive?
No, I think it's both. I think for some of us, getting the negative out feels good, and so that's why it does tend
And
to
that's, I
sound...
suppose, the thing that you want to change as well. But I
Yeah,
suppose you want
I mean, sometimes it's just a nice venue that you could just write it out on a page instead of yelling it at someone else, right? And then it's out and it hasn't hurt anyone's feelings and you haven't, caused harm in your marriage or with a child in a relationship. So sometimes it's just nice that way in the negative sense, but I think the positive is good too. I mean, I think about, for a medical example, someone who gets frequent headaches or other symptoms might be asked to keep a food diary, right? And then notice like, oh, I always get headaches when I drink milk. Maybe there's a connection, And so I think in marriage or in family life, that can be part of it too. Oh, I've noticed that we always have a big meltdown when, what were the common denominators and can I do anything about them?
Yeah.
Some of them you might not be able to do anything about, but at least you know that. And I think, again, there's a freedom in that sort of like, okay, this is one of those things that I'm just gonna have to offer it up and that's fine. Or this is one of those things where we can make a change and it doesn't even have to be a big change, but it could be like your alarm for dinner. That's a small change, but it probably helps quite a bit.
Yeah. It's changed our life. It's changed my evenings. and the children's more varied diets, mostly. And then as you were talking as well, I was thinking, where do I want to write down my thoughts? And as you were saying, like linking up what you're doing in life, potential what's happening in life, and with how you're feeling your responses to it, maybe a planner might be a good place to write as well. I've got the lovely Catholic Mother's Planner, and it's got a nice space, and I write things in it. And then I was thinking, oh, but maybe I wouldn't like that, or maybe I wouldn't carry it on. And then I thought, thinking too much, action, and then I thought, listen to Kerri, she's talking.
But again, like, you can try it.
But just try it.
You could just try
do
it.
the action.
Like, you don't have to make the decision for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
You can get a new planner, or you could just stop and not use your planner that way anymore, right? I think it's really freeing to think, oh, I could just try something, and if it doesn't work, I don't have to do it, right? Because these are not moral issues.
A couple of things. One is, so do you think I could journal for someone else, or even a child that you're noticing things? Or is that a thing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think keeping a record of what's going on or what you notice. I mean, I know some moms who do it on, this is a very positive thing, where they just sort of keep a journal of their childhood, of their child's childhood. So they'll say, today you did this, or I noticed, you started walking and you've got new words, or, you're really into Thomas the Tank Engine or whatever, and it kind of is a record for that child when they grow up, to be handed. So some moms do that, again, on a positive note. I think you could do it also on I'm noticing we're having a lot of issues in our family right now, and I'm going to just start to jot things down when I notice them and just see if I can see any patterns, because in the moment, obviously I can't, but over time, maybe that's possible.
And then the other question is what is the overall intention or goal of your journaling?
Hi.
Felicity's sold. She wants me to start her journal, which I bought a little book for all of them, and I do try and every now and then just write a nice little thing, or just sometimes I'll just say, I love you. You've been really sweet today with, one of the siblings or something. And I haven't started Felicity's one. No, and I also haven't been very consistent with the other ones either, but...
Yeah, but just bits. I mean, what a treasure that will be for them as an adult to know that you cared to take the time to write it down. And
a few bits.
Yeah, just bits here and there. I think the ultimate goal for individual journaling is really to get to know yourself and hopefully the Lord in that process, because he made you and not someone else, and why. And so that opens up that space for that dialogue. Why did you make me this way? And, what can I learn and how can I serve? And how can I bring God's love to the world in the unique way that he made me to bring it? So I think getting to know yourself is really kind of key for journaling. I think for some people it is also a space of relief, just kind of a release valve where, again, you're not shouting it out at someone else. You're just getting it down on the page and then it's gone.
Kerri, thanks so much. It is lovely to listen to a thinker. I feel like you've just done a lot of thinking for us, and we are, many of us, going to follow your advice. We'll put a link to your website on the video, and thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us, and I hope you'll come on again and give our feedback and share all the corners of paper that we've been writing, and the lovely Catholic Mother's Planner, which I recommend to people get. It's a very lovely book.
You can link to that as well.
Oh yeah, we'll link to that.
This planner looks very hardy, Kerri. Is it based on any particular decade? Looks like a 90s notepad.
Oh, thank you. This design.
Yeah,
I do love the 90s, gotta say. I'm a 90s kind of girl.
Thank you so much, Kerri. God bless you.
you.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us at the table. This is one of 9. We are working hard and have the family and do all the other bits at the same time, but we do want to bring some wisdom and give God glory